Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Antonucci. I'm a New Hampshire Peace Action Board member, and I'm really glad to welcome you to our Peace and Justice Conversation series online for August 28th, 2023. Quick reminder on Zoom etiquette. We love when you keep your video on if you're willing, but we do ask that you keep your audio muted. For now, you can use the chat at any time, and later on we'll do hand-raising Q&A discussion. But meanwhile, audio off is a great help. I'd actually like to start tonight with an acknowledgement that we are doing our work on Nidakina, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki people. We honor with gratitude the land, the waterways, and the Alnobak, the people, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. For over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all, based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict, where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. And for the last 14 of those 40 years, Will Hopkins has been our director. Will is a lifelong New Hampshire resident who served for 6 years in the New Hampshire National Guard. He was decorated for valor during a year-long tour in Iraq as an infantryman, including the fall 2004 Fallujah offensive. That experience brought him eventually to us. And since joining us, Will has organized grassroots education, public action, trainings on nonviolent direct action. He's been arrested in demos himself. He's done lobbying, political bird dogging, and peacekeeping, along with managing personnel, budgets, fundraising, etc. And he recently made a decision that many of you have heard about, and the way he framed it, and we'll hear more tonight, is that with the Iraq and Afghanistan wars finally drawing to a close, he decided that his voice as a decorated Iraq War veteran no longer had the weight that it brought to this position when he began, and that it was time for him to move on in September 2023 to make space for new voices and directions. So as he's wrapping up his time as director, he has brought together his thoughts that he wants to share with us about this experience, things he's learned, thoughts he's having. So what will happen now is he's going to share with us, and then we'll move to a Q&A discussion. But first, Will, we have a lot of feelings about your leaving, but tonight we're just so happy that you're going to share with us, and grateful to have you to speak again here. And everyone, please join me in some kind of welcome to Will. Oh, and Will does have a little lag in his video audio. We couldn't fix it, so just don't look too closely.
That's right. Yeah, one of the Amy mentioned that in a meeting it was making her a little car sick that my face is a couple seconds behind my voice, but hopefully it's not too obnoxious. Thank you, Amy, for that wonderful introduction. So yeah, 14 years. It's been wonderful, and I am so deeply grateful to all of you for letting me be the person who gets paid to be a part of this community. Be the voice of this community. I think that my most important takeaway is that we need to continue to focus on dignity for every human being as our central guiding principle, and that anytime we feel ourselves losing sight of that central guiding principle of the protection of dignity. We just need to recenter ourselves in that. And for us, that means putting a spotlight on the places where dignity is being the most violently and pervasively denied, in particular where our government is doing violence and denying human dignity. But as we look around at places like Palestine, Yemen, Ukraine, we also need to be looking at home. We need to be thinking about the people we're denying dignity, the people who we view as adversaries. Respect for human dignity necessitates a grounding in nonviolence. I think that that's something we get as peace activists inherently. It requires us to see how the bombing and killing of brown and black people overseas is an extension of the culture which allows the commonplace murder of BIPOC people all over this country by police without consequence. Racism and dehumanization are the structure under which consent for war is created, and I believe human dignity and respect for dignity and focus on dignity is the antidote. And I've talked, over and over again, I go back to Iraq as my galvanizing experience as a peace activist, seeing the people of Iraq traumatized, destitute, living under occupation. And it's been the thing that has gotten me up in the morning, wanting to make sure that if there's a way to protect children from living in that, innocent people from living under violence, that we have to do everything we can. It's a drive to save lives, and I think again, everybody here understands that. And it's frustrating because this is a very recalcitrant system. It's a system that is designed to protect itself. It's a system that is that depends on this violence to maintain its structure. And I know that for me, some of our work has been so powerful, and I think in particular of the things that we've done that have been focused on building community and our youth work. We certainly have had legislative impact. I think one of my early legislative campaigns was with a group of other activists pushing through a bill that required that superintendents don't allow the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, the ASVAB, to be taken in their schools without selecting a reporting option that maintains that the results can't be seen without parental permission. Other things that we've had huge wins on, seeing the Treaty on the Prohibition for Nuclear Weapons pass through the United Nations and going into force. We have had Syria actually stopping an authorization for the use of military force in Syria. But when I think of each of these things, I think of the ASVAB law, and the reality is that that was passed under John Lynch. I don't remember who the Commissioner of Education was at the time, but a year or two later, we got the statistics and realized that superintendents had simply ignored the law and weren't honoring it, that the results were going directly to recruiters, that parents were not being consulted, and that the law wasn't being followed. And when I took that to the Department of Education, Frank Edelblu refused to send out a memo, refused to respond in any way, and basically stopped accepting calls or emails. It wasn't Edelblu directly, it was other people who worked for Edelblu. But to this day, that law is largely ignored by superintendents. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, despite the fact that the United Nations Charter is a ratified treaty, which under the US Constitution we ought to follow, and that is a treaty that is in force. So we are bound by our Constitution to follow international law. We've completely ignored the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It's illegal for us to have, build, threaten to use, or use nuclear weapons. And we've simply decided that that law doesn't apply. In Syria, we did manage to stop US troops from going in, but the US instead dumped a whole lot of weapons and funding in, which wound up in the hands of al-Nusra and ISIS, and gave birth to the Islamic State. And massive violence was done regardless. And so I think that it is about shifting culture. And that's not to say that we should ignore what's going on the Hill. A recent victory is Yemen, and this is one that a lot of people don't know about because it was never big news, because we so dehumanize people in the Middle East. And in Yemen, hundreds of thousands of people died under starvation and an engineered cholera epidemic and blockade that was executed with US weapons. And we made calls, and I think that a lot of credit is due to Hassan Al-Tayeb of the Friends Committee on National Legislation for leading. Really, all of the peace organizations in the country look to him for leadership on Yemen, and we managed to legitimately shake US support for the Saudi offensive so much that the Saudis were driven to the negotiating table because they couldn't feel confident that US weapons were going to continue to flow. We didn't stop the weapons, but we almost did over and over, and they knew that it wasn't going to stand. And so they went to the negotiating table and put together a ceasefire. And we can take credit for that. That's hundreds of thousands of lives that were saved by the peace movement's work on Yemen. It's this thing that we don't take credit for because nobody's paying attention, but we did it. I was talking to Hassan this summer when he came to New Hampshire for a regional peace action retreat, and I said, you can't take credit for all of those lives, Hassan, but we're talking 100,000 lives, and you led that campaign, and I think you get credit for quite a few of them. And so there's a lot. We have done good legislatively, and I don't want to push that back, but I do want to say that what has really changed the world is where we've built relationships and where we have focused on human dignity. And I think of combatants for peace coming through New Hampshire and telling their stories, and being voices that could be heard by everyone. Former Israeli combatants, former Palestinian combatants who were talking about why war doesn't work and why human rights need to be respected for a peaceful solution to the problems, and doing it in a way where everyone could hear it. And specifically the practice of compassionate listening, where you listen to another person's story and you don't challenge what their truths are. I think we all, like Gandhi said, that all of us have a piece of the truth and a piece of the untruth. And I think that's something we need to accept, that we're not right about everything. None of us are. Recently, I think the bulk of the Republican Party right now, or at least a critical mass, believes that Trump won the 2020 election. And a critical mass of the Democratic Party believes that Russians hacked the 2016 election. And there isn't, both of these claims have been pretty thoroughly examined and pretty thoroughly debunked. That the election of Donald Trump, that we as Americans, we have to own that. That was American democracy. So as I move on from this position, the things that I want to make sure I leave people with is recognizing that Americans are, we don't like change. And changing from military Keynesianism, changing from a system where government investment in weapons manufacturing is a community development project. It is a way of making jobs and a way of trying to do social uplift. That means that when we say peace, when we say stop making weapons, we're threatening people's jobs, and that is hard work to do. We're not popular the peace movement with either political party, because both of them want to make jobs, and this is an area where they can agree to make jobs. And the other thing is that I want everybody to be thoughtful moving forward about how each of us care for ourselves and each other in this work, because it is so hard. That means taking breaks. It means going to therapy. It means meditating. It means being together in community in ways that aren't just talking about the problems with the world, but are supporting each other. It means setting boundaries on our own time. It means practicing gratitude. I think everybody who's been really, really close to me over the last year or two knows that I have not cracked the mystery of how do we do this work without burning out, without working ourselves to the bone. But I do think I have some ideas. The first is we live in a society where bigger is always better, more is always better. That is our system's model. And I think it's a part of the core of what's broken in our society. I don't think it's about doing more. I don't think it's about turning out more people. I don't think it's about doing it more frequently. When we think about activism, there is too much going on every day. If you're an activist, you have to pick. If it's a Saturday, you got to pick which good cause you want to go support. Those of us who are trying to change the world, to fix the world, we need to be thoughtful, and we need to be okay with limiting what we're doing. I don't think more is more. I think dignity is more. I think compassion is more. When you think about work that's done that really changes the world, I think of Daryl Davis, who's somebody who Amy turned me on to. He's a Black man. He's a jazz musician. In 1983, he was playing at a country western. He was playing bluegrass at a country western bar that was primarily white in Frederick, Maryland. And a patron came up to him and said it was the first time he'd heard a Black man play as well as Jerry Lee Lewis. And Davis told him, Jerry Lee learned to play from black blues and boogie woogie piano players, and he's a friend of mine. And the white patron was skeptical, and over a drink admitted he was a member of the KKK. And the two became friends, and eventually the man left the KKK and gave Daryl his robes. And a few years later, Davis really wanted to understand what had happened and decided to write a book about the KKK. And he wanted to answer, his question was, why do you hate me when you know nothing about me? And he set up a meeting with the imperial wizard of the KKK in Maryland, a man named Roger Kelly. Davis didn't tell him he was a Black man. This is a quote from him. He says, "My secretary called him and I told her, do not tell Roger Kelly I'm Black. Just tell him I'm writing a book on the Klan. I wanted her to call because she's white. I knew enough about the mentality of the Klan that they would never think a white woman would work for a Black man. She called him and he didn't ask what color I was. So we arranged to meet at a hotel. When he got there, Kelly had a bodyguard who was armed. But they made friends over hours of talking and just respecting each other's dignity in that space together. And in the end, Kelly left the Klan. He gave his robe to Davis. And then he invited Kelly to become his daughter's godfather. Over the years, he went on, and more than 20 people left the KKK. And in Maryland today, there is not very much Klan. And some people say it's completely gone. And it's because Daryl Davis kept networking, kept talking to people, kept giving them the space to have dignity, and showing them himself in a way where they were able to afford him the same dignity. He has a collection of robes and coins. He's got a medallion that's stamped KKK member in good standing. So my point is that when I And I want to say that I am still a part of New Hampshire's peace movement. But what I want for us moving forward is I want to see us not trying to make it bigger, but just making it more compassionate. One of the things that was really heartbreaking for me around the time that I made the decision to move on was watching a series that was put together by a news station out of Boston. It was called Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of New Hampshire. And in it, people I knew and I'm friendly with, some who were good friends, were interviewed on both sides of this, and it's about the Free State Project. And I want to say that their morality, the morality of the Free State Project is not the same as the peace movement, and their motivator isn't always the same. And and they've done a lot of damage to schools, but it was heartbreaking for me to watch, because I watched people who I considered friends bad mouthing people who moved here. And when they described why they moved here, almost every one of them said, I want to dismantle the federal government because what the federal government does is war. They are a war machine. And that, I mean, their framing isn't ours. And we disagree with the Free Staters on so much. And not that Free Staters are monolithic or they have one set of beliefs. But all of us have beliefs that are at odds with each other. And one of the things that really broke my heart was a good friend of mine being interviewed who said the things that the Free Staters believe in and that they came here to do are not popular with New Hampshire residents. And I thought to myself, well, dismantling the war machine is one of those things that's just not popular with New Hampshire residents. And I don't want it to be about what's popular. I want to listen to people and what they're saying based on the value of what they're saying. And a lot of what the Free Staters say, I don't agree with, but I agree with them that the war machine needs to be disassembled. And for me, it was heartbreaking to see villains being made out of people who are trying to make a better world, even though the way they see that world coming to be and the way they see it holding together is so radically different from the way that I see just future looking. They came because they wanted to end that violence. So I want to ask everybody to think about compassion, about humanizing, about not writing someone off because they're a Trumper, not writing someone off because they're a Free Stater, not writing someone off because they're a Democratic loyalist, but instead looking to dignity and respecting the dignity of everyone. Speaking of things that we don't all agree about, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ukraine and how hard that's been for the peace movement. In 2014, there's a change in government in the Ukraine, and some people call that a coup and believe it was a coup, and others define it as a popular revolution for human dignity. But former Secretary of Defense Bill Perry started warning back then that what it had created was a situation and a moment with greater potential for nuclear war than perhaps any we'd faced during the Cold War or any time during history. He's maintained that position ever since. And in the following years, I read with growing concern as the Azov battalion in Ukraine became the largest armed, openly Nazi militia on the planet and received American weapons. We sent out emails twice, both under Barack Obama and Joe Biden, for our Senate to deny Victoria Nuland's confirmation to the position of State Department chief in charge of the region because her family fortune is built on weapons sales, and her policy was quite openly to do whatever was necessary to maximize weapons sales in the Warsaw Pact states. During those intervening years, I went to webinars with US and Russian foreign policy experts, including a Russian general and professor at the Russian War College, who explained that every 50 to 100 years since Alexander the Great, Russia has had to fend off an invasion from the West, and that one of the top strategic imperatives of the Russian military was to ensure that a hostile military alliance could not stage east of the Urals, as they represent the only natural barrier before a wide plain that tanks can move across freely all the way to Moscow. I watched and wrote in protest as the US and NATO repeatedly refused to guarantee the security of Russia inside their borders or even consider such a guarantee in negotiations. I spoke and wrote and worked against NATO expansion in the Warsaw Pact states because it was dangerous and provocative and was likely to create this kind of situation. And after the Russian invasion, had to really change how we talked about things, because all of that history was something that most people weren't interested in hearing about and didn't believe was true. The first substantive email we sent out had 5 unsubscription emails, all really angry emails in response. 2 said that we were parroting US State Department propaganda and lying to support the agenda of American hegemony. And 3 claimed we were Russian stooges doing the work of the Kremlin. And one of the things that I have had to come to realize about Ukraine is that we're not going to agree on the history or the role that NATO played in creating this, or that the US played in creating this. Studies have shown that when you expose people to information that runs counter to the narratives they hold, they begin to more aggressively defend and support those positions in response. People do back off from those positions and eventually reverse them if they're exposed to those positions taken to an extreme. So when we talk about meeting people where they are, it's defended by psychology as the effective way to bring people into action and getting them to commit to a cause like peace. I'm going to tip my hand a bit and say that my personal belief surrounding Ukraine is that the United States government chose to create these conditions and knew that they would be unacceptable to Moscow. They refused to engage in good faith diplomacy because the current situation is the one they preferred, because it's the one that maximizes weapons sales and profits to the military-industrial complex, and because it economically damages Russia as a global adversary. And that the thing is, it's really hard to say that to people because they're going to buckle down and say, no, this is Putin. Putin is evil. Most people, I think that something that is a fact that I'm sure people are going to be mad that I'm saying is a fact is that the Russiagate conspiracy was completely manufactured. Jeremy Love, who's on the call, explained it. When we saw the dollar amounts that we were talking about in Facebook ads, he was like, "Wait, so all of Russiagate was about the salary of a middle school paraprofessional?" As far as I'm concerned, that narrative was part of a long-term propaganda strategy that was executed by American imperialist media as a means to demonize Russia and gain widespread support for what we were confident we were going to push them into here. I'd hazard to say that most of our members, and certainly most people we're trying to reach with our message, and try to convince to get involved with pursuing a peaceful future. Probably a number of people in the Zoom right now haven't been that closely following Russia and Ukraine since 2012 or 2013, haven't been doing a few hours of reading every week or every other week to make sure that they know exactly what's going on. But I think that the Russiagate conspiracy theory was about building anti-Russian sentiment. And I think that when we talk about fake news and propaganda, like, sure, we all know that Fox News lies, but the New York Times lies, the MSNBC lies, the Washington Post lies, CNN lies. These are, in my opinion, imperialist propaganda outlets masquerading as journalism, and I think they have been for a really long time. American arms companies, including a lot who employ people here in New Hampshire, have been making massive sums of money, and it's not convenient for anyone to disbelieve the narrative that's been built here by media that is complicit in this. At least for folks on the left, it requires us to take a look at what's in the heart of our nation and our culture. If Russia didn't hack the 2016 election, that means that Trump and all that he represents is really an outcome of American democracy, because mocking the disabled, being openly racist, bragging about sexually assaulting married women, all of it was closer to the heart of the American psyche than the alternative. And Americans chose that for leadership. It wasn't because Vladimir Putin, the evil dictator from the other side of the world, hacked the election. Trump is who America chose, and that's uncomfortable. And I don't know how to shake people out of a narrative with roots that are that painful to look at. It reminds me of where a lot of Iraq vets were when we came home. These are the vets who shouted at me and threatened me for doing this work when I started. They're so committed to the idea that what we had done was good and true and just, and that it would lead to a better future for Iraq. They were so attached to that idea because of all we'd been through and all we'd sacrificed, that my being opposed to the war was offensive and rage-inducing. In reference to Ukraine specifically, I don't know if it's necessary to shake people loose from the strategic narratives to force diplomacy. Most everyone can agree that a ceasefire and treaty needs to be reached, and that Ukraine, Russia, NATO, and the US all have to be party to that. That's the goal, and maybe we don't have to shake people loose by talking about some of the history that is disputed, or some of the history that's really uncomfortable. In the long term, I think we do need people to recognize how completely beholden Americans are to a network of propaganda outlets. And we do need to loosen the grip of that propaganda. The idea that we are constantly in jeopardy of war from other countries is false. The idea that our spending more than the next 10 nations the next 10 nations combined is needed, needs to be shaken. And again, I don't know how to do that. People cling to their versions of reality. People cling to their propaganda and their narratives. So we have to speak truth, and we have to figure out how to do it in a way where people don't just double down on the things they believe. I don't know that I have a lot of great answers after 14 years, especially about Ukraine in this specific situation. But that doesn't mean that I can't see all the good that we've done together. I can identify a bunch of times where either we in New Hampshire or peace activists in this country have changed the game. And again, I think we're at our best, not when we're fighting which version of history is true, but when we're speaking truth about human life and human dignity. When we stop demonizing each other, we stop demonizing the other side, whoever that is, we stop arguing for narrative control, and we instead focus just on the humanity of the people in the situations that we're talking about. Have compassion. That's power. It's not about numbers. It's about just seeing humanity and helping others see humanity. It's practicing and modeling compassion. Gosh, do I wish I could have grown membership during this time. The peace movement across the country has been shrinking. It's a smaller and smaller number of committed activists, but in the end, I don't think it's about numbers. I think it's about focusing on that principle. In the 14 years, we've had an impact on the world. I think that folks with Post Landfill Action Network and New Hampshire Youth Movement would say that their founding was because of the training that we were able to give at the Peace of Mind retreat for our high school students over those years. I think that a lot of that work, and not because of, but that it supported them, that those folks felt like they could change the world and were given the tools they needed to build organizations that did change the world at those retreats. I think 350 New Hampshire, which we were their organizational incubator, and I tried to be as present as I could be for their staff leadership over those years. I think 350 New Hampshire is something that we helped put together. I think that, despite the creation of ISIS and the reality that we sent weapons to Syria anyway, moving Anne McLean Custer is one of the last Democrats to publicly oppose invading Syria in 2012. That's something we did. And she was one of, she was one of the last 7 or so Democrats in the House to say they would not support an AUMF to attack Syria. So we did that. We stopped a U.S. war in Syria after after the use of chemical weapons. I think we've helped the larger progressive community understand the role of militarism in the Pentagon in stalling out progress of the things we need, like healthcare and education and infrastructure and green energy. I think that we've done a whole ton culturally to shape a more peaceful world together too. And I know that New Hampshire Peace Action is going to continue to do this work as I make space for new leadership. So the last thing I want to say before we get into discussion is thank you all. Thank you for all the work you've done on peace and anti-racism and the environment and economic justice and all the things you've worked on. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for supporting this organization. Most of all, thank you for not losing faith that a better world is possible. And thank you for continuing to work for it. So let's chat.
Will, thank you for sharing all of those thoughts, some of which I have a sense you felt were edgy and maybe we'll have reactions to, but you were willing to put out there, and I am grateful. And yeah, I think ideally, use your reaction button and raise your hand if you'd like to say something to Will. Questions are particularly, would be particularly good to hear. I will quickly say that towards the end here of our time together in a little while, I will be also giving you some other ways and places that you can express your thoughts, feelings, gratitude to Will. But tonight is one of those places. The chat is open for you. But he's also said a lot of meaty stuff on what we've been doing. And so your reactions, your thoughts, very useful. I do actually, I came up with, Will, you talked about how you weren't sure you had any answers for us. So I've got to read one of my favorite Einstein quotes. If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would use the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I knew the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. So,
yeah. So maybe it's the question that matters here.
Sometimes.
I do see at least one question in the chat from Evelyn about articles. And I know we had it was while I was on leave last year, and I don't think I ever actually watched it, but we did have a program on propaganda in the media, didn't we? Like pro-war propaganda? Or did that never come together?
It didn't, but we are having one soon. It's far enough away. I think it's in November. We have a man coming to speak with us for a Monday night about the media's role in making war, the US media. So we agree that is an incredibly important topic, and we are excited to have found someone to talk with us about it. And that will happen this fall. Yeah. But go ahead, Will.
Oh, that was it. I haven't written on it. It's just, I used to listen to Michael Barbaro every morning, and I just couldn't do it after a while because some of it was just so blatant, just blatant imperial propaganda. I think Whitney's got a question, so let's go there.
Yeah, so this is one of those, what advice do you give to the person who be stepping into your very large shoes? And let me give a little frame to it. I think you really put your finger, Will, on the the heart of the matter, the pulse of the matter is the unpopularity of the peace movement because of our addiction to, right, the list of American exceptionalism and imperialism and the buying into the propaganda and the media. And the willingness for people to, because we're so partisan in our country right now, vilify the other party. And it's not popular. Peace movement's not popular largely because I feel like we have to speak truths that are uncomfortable. And you did such a beautiful job, I think. Thank you for narrating tonight some of that controversial messaging around Ukraine and even around Yemen. And so the question, I guess, is how does the next leader of this organization in alignment with a board that's very dedicated to speaking truth to power, balance and walk that fine line? Because it's easier to vilify, right? It must be the Republicans who love war, but we all know that both parties are addicted to ignorance and perhaps also complicity when it comes to militarization and weapons manufacture and the jobs piece of that. So is there, it's a tough question, sorry, but is there any piece of, we have to not scare everyone away, and yet we also have to speak our truth. And I feel like you will, in the 14 years that I've watched you in this role, you've done such an honorable job of attending to your truth, seeking knowledge, doing the research, finding the balance, but also sometimes choosing the unpopular. But is there something for the next generation? What nugget can you give to that future leader when it comes to both balance, but not balance, right? Like finding the way to be true. Thank you.
Oh gosh. Winnie, that is such a, again, like it's one of those hard to answer questions. Like I don't, there are truths that need to be spoken, because if we're not speaking those truths, we're not doing the work. We're not, if we're not saying, hey, people are dying, if we're not pissing some people off, if we're not agitating on some level, we're not really doing the work. And it's finding that balance, understanding, when to say those hard things and when not to. It's not easy, and I don't know that I do it right or have ever done it right. And I appreciate that you have, that you've liked the way I've done it. But I've had people write angry letters and leave the organization because of the truths I've told, or because of the truths that I haven't had the courage to tell. And I do think that there's something to be said for the wisdom of the whole. There's something to be said for, the board of directors at New Hampshire Peace Action have been a council of wise elders that I've had to help guide me through these things. And I certainly wouldn't have been able to message the way I did without that council. And so I think if I was talking to the person who steps into this role and they said, how do you know what to say? I'd say, when you don't know what to say, you ask. Because that's what you've got a board for. That's what you have this group of people for. So turn to them and use them for that. And I think that's the best advice I could give. And I know it's not substantive in a lot of ways, but it is, talk to people, bounce it off of people, and seek the wisdom of the community.
Thank you, Will. Thank you.
And George has a hand up there. George?
Hi, thank you. Glad to be here, and not a New Hampshire person, almost lifelong, since college, Peace Action person. Well, it was St. Freeze back then. Well, it was same, then it was St. Freeze. But I really value the work y'all have done and appreciate you. I want to mention something, Will, that you didn't mention, or I missed it if you did, but I think it's one of our biggest issues, and I have a quick question for you as well. That big issue is this country's, I think it's a US problem, it may be a cultural problem for all people, but the obsession with finding someone to blame. What's that about? Seriously.
Yeah.
You might have a conversation or spend time with people, and the only thing they're talking about is whose fault is it? Who am I going to blame? What does that get you? It's not analysis. It's not helping you to generate a response. The biggest example to me was around Iran-Contra. And at the time in LA, crack and cocaine was everywhere. And the Iran-Contra hearings weren't about racism or destroying Black people with drugs. It was all about who we can blame. It was crazy. Okay, I'm gonna shut up then. But that's a lesson for all of us. It's one of the reasons that when you talk about white supremacy with white people, they feel like, oh my God, you've accused me of being racist. Racist. It's not an indictment. White supremacy is ubiquitous. If you're not working to get it out of your consciousness, it is there, and it's doing you injustice every freaking day. All right, that's it. That's my preaching done. My question for you, Will, is thank you, Whitney. Go, baby. What is going to be the hardest thing about the change for you? What is going to take you, what might you need somebody to call you and listen to your vent, or say, relax, or go outside and climb a tree? What's going to be hardest about your current reality when you begin your new reality?
I don't know. Oh, that's so, I mean, there's so much. I'm not losing this community, and that's the thing that would worry me the most. I know that I will still have Peace Action, that I will still be a member of Peace Action, that I will still have this community. The thing that's challenging is giving up control, which I think it's healthy to get used to giving up control. Like, I'm not going to be the one approving what gets posted on the Facebook group. I'm not going to be the one deciding what the messaging is on the email blasts, that somebody else gets to do that. And that, I mean, I know letting go of that is healthy. And that it's something I've got to work through. I don't know what the hardest thing is going to be, because I haven't gotten there yet. I've still got a couple weeks left here. But I know that I know that one of the things my sister, who's a UU minister, told me is that I'm going to cast a big shadow with the organization, and that I need to be ever in the corner of the new person, even when I disagree. That's something that I can't ever be critical of them publicly or privately. That really, if I don't have anything nice to say, I need to back up. And I think she's right. I think that I for the health of the organization, will need to just trust, and that trust is going to be hard, because I'm so used to being in the position of having stewardship of what's coming out of New Hampshire Peace Action. But I don't know. And I just want to say I really appreciate what you had to say about the need for us to blame someone, and how that almost never is productive. It's and it really is the source of last week, if anybody was paying attention, the New York Times, there was an article about the division in the peace movement around Ukraine, and specifically Peace Action got called out for having a divide around it. And it really is like, who are we going to blame for the invasion of Ukraine? That's the divide. And how unhealthy is that, and how ridiculous? We need a ceasefire. We need the war to end. We should be looking forward to that. How do we get to a place where we can find a peace agreement? And how destructive that we instead bicker over whose fault it is that it happened. I do understand the pain on both sides. People who think that it's so clearly, because Russia is a pretty harsh country, and this invasion, I don't think, was necessary for their security. There are people who are upset that we are pointing the finger at NATO. And then there are a lot of people who felt really gaslit, because for years we've been talking about how dangerous NATO policy was and US policy was. And then suddenly that disappeared because we had to message differently. And there were people who felt gaslit and hurt. But you're right that it's just a matter of laying blame, which is not helpful. So thank you.
Thanks, Will. I see a hand from Moji.
Hello, all. Hello, brother Will.
Hey,
It
Moji.
just happened that a little song came to me, so I'm going to sing it for you. Thank you for building peace. Thank you, brother Will. Lots of love we have for you. Lots of luck we wish for you. Thank you, brother Will. Thank you, brother Will.
Thank you, Moji.
Lovely. How fun. Thanks, Moji. And David, I see that your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for your thoughts, Will, as well as for 14 years and for whatever's to come. Your words helped me to reflect that the work of responding to injustice is partly what you've done a lot, reading, informing yourself, just doing due diligence to try to understand what really is happening. And then no matter how much knowledge we may hold in our heads, there's then a process of discerning what's useful, how to share with compassion, which does not require agreement. And that's to hold both of those, which has to be frustrating sometimes because you have many times known or been quite sure that you knew what the facts are telling, but people are simply not in the same ballpark with you. I'm not in the same ballpark with you on some stuff, and sometime I would love to be better educated, but ultimately it's how we relate to the other person and to what extent we can see their suffering that has in some sense brought them to a position of denigrating or scapegoating or whatever other people. So what you've done is partly intellectual discipline, but really more than anything else, I think it's a spiritual practice.
Thank you, David. Yeah, no, and and I also know that some of the things that I think are truths are probably not. I know that I'm probably wrong about a bunch of things, and that I've probably read sources that are propaganda, in the same way that I see the New York Times being propaganda. That I have probably been misled in some of my beliefs, but I think all of us just try to do our best. Will, Thomas, I see your hand up. We can't see many cameras, so try to use the hand raise function or mention it in the chat if you have a question. But
okay, willpower. Will, I want to say that you have been a tremendous leader, an inspiration to so many people. Yeah, you pissed off some people too, but that's good because you made them think. And one of the things that, and by the way, about propaganda, of course, the whole thing, and unfortunately, as a history teacher, most Americans don't know history, don't want to know history. That the Russia was promised that NATO would not move 1 inch towards in their direction, and of course that promise was never upheld. And so therefore, and with the missiles being sent into Romania, Poland, I mean, I'm not a fan of Putin, but I understand where he's coming from. If China placed missiles in Mexico near our border, and actually, Russia did place missiles in Cuba. So we understand.
you were there.
Yeah.
I said,
Yeah.
you know, you were there.
Exactly. Well, not in Cuba, on the ship around Cuba, but anyway. So, but another thing that really got me, Will, was your emphasis on children. And I heard Kathy Kelly, BFP, Veterans for Peace, held their convention this weekend. Kathy Kelly, some of you may have known or may know and met her and read her books or whatever. I mean, she's the closest thing I know to a saint. And she spoke, she was in Iraq right before the attack, shock and awe. Spent much time in Afghanistan, etc. But she said, her quote was, the most beautiful thing in the world, she said, is seeing and hearing children at play. And that made me reflect on the poem that you wrote to the teacher of your child and children. And I think that's so important. And dignity, yes, with human rights, because human rights, I think, are the key to restoring dignity for those who are oppressed. And we say we are supporting human rights, but of course we're denying so many different countries and people. And this whole thing, in Ukraine does bother me immensely, because so many innocent people, non-combatants, are being killed. And by the way, I posted in the chat, there's a war crimes tribunal being held November 12th, I think, in DC, but you can register to go online. And they're going to hold responsible people like Raytheon and Boeing and I think maybe even BAE here from New Hampshire. But anyway, I guess the bottom line is that, well, you made people think, and the whole thing with the youth, so important. Got to bring more young people into this peace movement. The Veterans for Peace, I was looking at the, online, and we're pretty ancient, so, and anyway, so best to you. And unfortunately, I'm going to be missing September 29th. We'll be out of the country. I will not be in Russia, but I will be out of the country. So bon voyage.
Thank you, Will. I'm going to need to wrap up in a minute. I want to fit in one question. I do want to let folks know, though, that while we like to end the official meeting on time, Will has said he will stay longer for a little more conversation. But Griffin, I'd love to have you be our last question or comment.
Thanks, Amy. Will, I want to know if there is a singular moment in the past 14 years that you could go back and just get to live through it all again and not make changes, but just get to live and experience that moment again. What would that moment be?
Oh gosh. Has so many good moments, so many I think being dragged through the snow in DC is definitely up there. When we were protesting the second surge in Afghanistan, which is back 2010, 2011, very early in my time. But that was a really, Medea Benjamin was arrested, Daniel Ellsberg was arrested, Chris Hedges was arrested, the whole board of Vets for Peace, which I was on at the time. That was a really fun day. It was snowing. It was like a foot of snow, and it was cold, but it was everybody was in really good spirits. There have been so many moments. Peace of mind. Any one of those peace of minds would be a wonderful thing to go through again. And you were there for most of them, Griffin. But without fail, they would bring me to tears. Just how wise and committed the young people were. I've enjoyed watching people like you and Alex being honored for the things you've done. That's really been cup filling for me. I don't know. But yeah, there are too many to pick one.
Thanks.
Will.
Will. Yeah, and thanks, Griffin. That's a great question. And I have some things I need to say to you folks tonight. First of all, we're just so grateful. Can never really express to you how grateful we are to you, Will, for all that you've done for New Hampshire Peace Action and for peace and justice. And we're really, really sad to see you move on, but also excited for your future and ours. And we have, just so you all know, we've secured a promise from Will to not disappear, but to join us as a volunteer before too long, including being the barbecue tender at all our summer meetings, right, Will?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, let me tell you first a few ways that you can continue to express gratitude and thoughts to Will. First of all, there's a link in the chat to a virtual place where you can write a message. Don't tell Will, it's a surprise. Also, Will's last day, September 15th. If you're in the area, we happen to be having a rally to end war and warming in Concord, New Hampshire, 5 to 6 p.m. in front of the State House. So we're gonna rally Will out. So you can join us for that. Also, I know that he plans to attend our fall fundraiser on September 29th, 6 to 8:30 p.m. in Manchester. And it will be his first event not as director. So these are all places that you can continue to help us all through this transition. And I will say we are just starting interviews for our next director. We've been going through a process of evaluating and thinking about next steps. And there's a group of us, the board members and volunteers, plus Doreen, thank goodness, who will move us through this transition in this time without a director. So please be patient, but keep showing up and let us know if you can help to get through the span of time that we'll be trying to pick up what Will has done. And then eventually we'll have a new person to welcome that we are excited to figure out who that is. Okay, so some other things. Stay in touch with New Hampshire Peace Action at nhpeaceaction.org. You can also look us up on Facebook to see what we're working on and what other events we have coming up or programming we have coming up. And I want to give you a taste. Our online auction begins on September 1st, goes through September 22nd. There's artwork, gift cards, vacation rentals, handcrafted treasures, China sports, all sorts of wonderful donated items. And that is at, oh my goodness, app.galabid.com/2023 auction/categories. And I'm sure I hope I put that in the chat or someone will.
It is in the chat.
Oh, thank you. Okay, our next meeting of the Peace and Justice Conversation series is Monday, September 11th, 7 to 8 p.m. on Zoom. And it's going to be switching roles. I'll be kind of leading it, and Will still be here for that one, helping more in the background, just transitioning out. And the topic is Boat Lift, an untold tale of 9/11 resilience. We're going to watch a real short film and have a discussion about a story you don't usually hear from 9/11/01. And we're going to be asking, what can we learn from the moments of cooperation, mutual aid, and participatory democracy that happened in the wake of the violence that we were not supposed to look at? September 15th, 5 to 6 p.m. Join us in front of the Concord, New Hampshire State House. The rally to end war and warming is in support of the New York City March to End Fossil Fuels. That's going to happen a couple days later. This Friday evening event is co-sponsored by NHPA, 350 New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Sierra Club, and more groups are coming on. Then September 29th, it's a Friday, from 6 to 8:30, is this year's fall fundraiser with which will feature the Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. She will speak about a unified response to interlocking crises. This is a hybrid event. You can come to the Puritan Conference Center in Manchester, New Hampshire, where we'll have food and social time as well, or join by Zoom, and the ticket prices begin at $25. This series is free and open to all, but your donations are greatly appreciated. Again, as we go into an uncertain but exciting moment, your support in any way is going to be incredibly, incredibly welcome, as always. So please join me in a visible thank you of Will as we shut down our streamed part. And if you want to hang in for a little more informal conversation, go ahead. But thank you, everyone. And thank you, Will. We love you.